Immanuel Kant. Okay, I know, the name alone can sound a little intimidating. But his goal? Actually, it was surprisingly simple. He wanted to find a single, universal moral law that could work for everyone, everywhere, with absolutely no exceptions. So, let's see if we can crack his code together.
To get our heads in the right space, just ask yourself this. Is it ever okay to tell a white lie? Maybe to spare a friend's feelings? Or what about to get yourself out of a tight spot? We've all been there. And this is exactly the kind of messy, real-world problem that Kant wanted to solve, once and for all.
You see, if we base our morality on feelings or on the consequences of our actions, we run into trouble, fast. A lie to protect a friend feels completely different from a lie to avoid paying a debt, but, well, they're both still lies, right? Kant argued that if morality just changes depending on our mood or what we're trying to achieve, it's not really morality at all. It's just preference. He was looking for something way more solid than that.
So this led Kant on his central quest. Could there actually be a universal moral compass? A single principle that's good in every single situation? No ifs, ands, or buts.
Now, to build a universal law, he knew he needed a universal foundation. It's like building a house. You can't start with a roof. So he began by searching for something that isn't just good for a particular purpose, but something that is good in and of itself. Good, with no qualifications. What's really fascinating is what Kant immediately rules out. I mean, think about it. Intelligence, courage, power, even happiness. All these things seem great, don't they? But Kant points out that a villain can be incredibly intelligent. A criminal mastermind can be courageous and powerful. These things can be used for absolutely terrible ends. So no, none of them can be the ultimate unconditional good.
So if it's not courage or health or even happiness, what in the world is left? Well, for Kant, the answer was simple, and it's the very first major piece of his puzzle, the good will.
In his own words, the only thing that can be called good without any strings attached is a good will. And this is a pretty radical idea, right? It means an action's moral worth isn't found in its results, but somewhere else entirely. So here's the kicker. A good will has its value entirely within itself. Even if you try your absolute best to do something good and you fail miserably, the intention, the will itself, shines like a jewel, as Kant so beautifully put it. It's the motivation that counts, not the outcome.
Okay, that's a really powerful idea, but it immediately leads to a very practical question. If it's all about the intention, then what kind of intention makes the cut? What does a person with a good will actually do? And this brings us to the next giant piece of the puzzle. According to Kant, a good will is one that acts from duty. And this is where he makes a super critical distinction. The difference between doing something because it's your duty versus just doing something that happens to line up with your duty. They sound similar, but they're worlds apart.
Kant's famous shopkeeper example explains this perfectly. Imagine two shopkeepers. They both give correct change, every time. The first one does it out of self-interest. He knows that having a good reputation is good for business. The second one does it simply because he believes it is the right thing to do. For Kant, only the second shopkeeper's action has any real moral worth. So morality isn't about feeling sympathy for someone, and it's definitely not about wanting a good reputation. It's about recognizing a moral law and choosing to follow it because it is the law. It's all about acting out of respect for the principle itself.
All right, this all leads to the final and most crucial question. If we're supposed to act from duty for the sake of this moral law, how in the world do we figure out what that law actually is? How can we be sure? And Kant's answer is his single most famous contribution to philosophy, the categorical imperative. The best way to think of it as a kind of universal acid test, a simple logical tool that anyone, anywhere, can use to discover their moral duty. Now, this is the most famous version of it, and I know, it sounds like a real mouthful. But stick with me here, because the idea behind this dense language is actually incredibly elegant and surprisingly simple. First, we gotta know what a maxim is.
Don't let the word scare you. It's just Kant's fancy term for your personal rule or the policy for the action you're thinking about taking. So something like, when I'm in a tough spot, I'll lie to get out of it. That's a maxim. So here's the test, broken down into 3 easy steps. First, just state the rule you're about to act on. Second, imagine that rule suddenly becomes a universal law of nature, like gravity, something everyone has to do. And third, check if that world even makes sense. Is there a logical contradiction? Does the whole thing just fall apart? Let's run a test with Kant's own example of making a lying promise to borrow money. My maxim is clear. When I need cash, I'll promise to pay it back, even though I have no intention of doing so.
Okay, now for step 2, the magic step. What happens in a world where everyone lives by this rule, where it's a universal law that people just make false promises whenever it's convenient for them? And the result? It's a total logical collapse. In that world, the very idea of promise-keeping would completely fall apart. The word promise would be meaningless because nobody would ever believe one. The maxim, when you make it universal, literally destroys the very concept it needs to work in the first place. It contradicts itself, and therefore, for Kant, it's immoral. Simple as that.
This whole process, this idea of using our own reason to test our personal rules, leads to Kant's final and honestly pretty mind-bending conclusion about where morality actually comes from. I mean, think about it. If the moral law isn't based on God's commands, or our feelings, or the consequences, but on what can be logically willed as a universal law by any rational person, then the source of that law is reason itself. And since we all possess reason, we are all, in a very real sense, the authors of the moral law. He called this autonomy. And that, for Kant, is the very source of human dignity. We're not just cogs in a machine, blindly following someone else's rules. Our incredible value comes from our capacity to use our own reason to create a universal moral law, and then choose to live by it. So, in the end, Kant gives us this powerful, incredibly consistent framework for morality that's based on reason alone. But it also leaves us with this huge, profound question. Is pure, cold, logical consistency really enough? Can a moral system that pushes aside feelings, relationships, and specific contexts truly guide us through the beautiful, messy reality of being human? That's definitely something to think about.